My name is Fanwick. I'm today interviewing Elaine Nessin. It's February 3rd, 2010, and we're doing this for the Stanford Jewish Historical Society. And my cameraman is Julian Reitman. This gives us something to go into our archives, which hopefully someone will want to look at for many years after this. Elaine, your last name is Nessin.
Correct.
I understand that's a Sephardic name.
It is, yes. Ben is Sephardic.
Where did Ben's...
His parents came from Turkey and settled in New York, and there he is.
Tell me, where did your parents come from?
Well, my parents were born in Poland. Both of them were there. But of course, in those years, you were Poland, Russia, Austria. You know, one day you were something else, but that's where they're from.
Both of your parents?
Both of my parents. And they came to the U.S. and they settled in New York. And in those days, you settled in the Lower East Side, which is where...
About when did they come here?
Well, I would have to say... I guess it had to be after the First World War. But my sister was born in 1924, so I would have to say maybe 1920, you know, about. Not quite sure.
And you went to school in New York?
Yes, we lived in the Bronx. After my parents, of course, when they left the Lower East Side, my sister was born on the Lower East Side. We then moved to the Bronx.
Your sister's name was?
Betty Silver Barron, married to Mickey Barron, who was a native of Stanford. And
they owned the Stanford Credit Union.
Yes, Mickey and Betty had the Stanford Credit Rating Bureau. And his father, I don't know if you know Sachs Plumbing.
Yes.
That was Mickey's sister and brother-in-law, Charlie and Gussie Sachs.
Oh.
Yeah, so they had kind of a lot of family here.
Yeah. What brought them to Stanford? My
parents?
Yes.
Well, actually, I had family here. Mickey Scherer is my father's first cousin.
Oh.
Yeah, my grandmother and Mickey's mother were sisters. So, of course, you know, we came to Stanford when I was a kid, you know, just to visit. And then my sister married Mickey, and they stayed in Stanford. And then my parents moved up shortly thereafter.
What did your parents do when they came to Stanford?
Well, my father used to work in New York. My father was a waiter. He worked at the Concord Hotel in Carmichael Lake, New York. And my mother was a homemaker. And then she started to work with Mrs. Falk, Mrs. Falk was a caterer. My mother would waitress and help her as such.
Your mother worked alone, or did she work only with Mrs. Falk?
No, she never worked alone. It was usually with Mrs. Falk. You know, she waited. She was a waitress.
Yes.
And for a number of years, in fact, they worked together when the Jewish Center had the summer day camp.
Yeah.
They prepared lunches for the kids, etc.
I remember one New Year's Eve, they catered a New Year's Eve party at the Jewish Center.
Right.
Tell me about the rest about your family.
Well, my husband's name is Ben. He comes from the Bronx. He is Sephardic. And it was very funny, I had never heard of a Sephardic Jew. You know, in our area in the Bronx, you were either a Litvak or an Ashkenazi. So, you know, then we found out about Sephardim. And he wanted to stay in Stanford. I was living here, he was living in the Bronx. And we stayed here, raised a family. We have 3 daughters, Janice, Sheila, and Cheryl. And we have 5 grandchildren, 5 wonderful grandchildren.
What did Ben do when he came to Stanford?
He did not work in Stanford. He worked in New York. He worked in the jewelry business, you know, all his life, really. He was in the Navy, got out of the Navy, and he went to watchmaking school in New York, and after that he worked in the jewelry store, for a store in the Bronx. Dubin and Kusansky was the name of the store. They moved to the Grand Concourse, but then in his career, before he had his own business. He managed Black Star and Frost and White Plains. He managed Tornos in Manhattan. And then, that's about 30 odd years ago, he bought his own store, and we had a store in Pleasantville, New York, Westchester, which is in Westchester County.
What did you do as?
I was a secretary. I graduated high school. When we moved to Stamford, I entered my junior year in high school, graduated in '49, and worked in New York. Well, I have to say that when I graduated, Fair Lawn was just being built. We lived on Lawn Avenue, and when we moved here, Fair Lawn was an estate.
What year was that?
I guess it was 1947. And we used to go huckleberry picking on the property there. And then Fair Lawn came along. And I worked there for a short time in the office, and then I worked in New York as a secretary.
Fair Lawn was probably one of the first garden apartments in Stamford.
I think so. I think so. I don't know, Woodside Village was not considered a garden apartment because, you know, they had at least 3 floors. I think they might have been here before, but I'm not quite sure.
When you came to Stamford, what was your childhood like?
Well, I was not very happy. I was not a happy camper because at that stage, when you're that young and you're sort of in between, I think I was about 15 or 16, and it's very difficult to make a move, particularly from New York to Stamford, which people, as Arnold will say, it was a much smaller town than it is now. And it's a difficult transition.
Did you become active at the Jewish Center?
To a degree. In fact, when I was in high school, now that you mentioned it, I worked in the office at the Jewish Center for a while. And
that was much later, though.
No, it was when I was in high school.
Oh, you were in high school?
Yeah, in high school. Just, you know, part-time, yeah, you know, after school, maybe on a Sunday. I can't remember that, but, you know, it was a part-time job, which was nice because you saw the people coming and going, and you sort of get to know a person or so because you're there. Because it was a very active place then.
Yeah. Did your family join a Good Shalom when they came to Stamford?
Not right away, but they were members, you know, eventually of Good Shalom. And of course, after Ben and I got married, since the family were members there, you know, it just went that we became members of Agudath.
And when did you become active in Hadassah?
Oh my God, oh, many moons ago. When I first moved to Stamford, one of the first people I met was Rhea Golden Coleman. And our friendship goes back many, many years. And I remember being pregnant with my daughter Janice, and she said, you know, there's a Hadassah meeting. I said, oh, really? You know, I was on the fence. She said, come on, let's see what it's like. And I will say that was about 55 years ago. And met some wonderful women there. And in fact became very socially friendly. I mean, it was a small group at the time, and we became very friendly. We loved what we did. I mean, we cooked, we cleaned, you know, for functions that we had.
Was it Gladys Ailes then?
It started out as the business and professional. At the next installation, it became the Gladys Ailes group of Hadassah. And actually, you're not permitted to name an organization after a living person. And Gladys Ailes was our mentor. I mean, she was very much alive. But they let us pass, and we were able to keep that name.
What year was that?
I would say it was about 53 or 54, 1953 or 54, around that time. Approximately.
When you were in, you came, what grade were you when you came to Stanford?
I started my junior year in high school when I came here. I was 16.
Did you have any problems with anti-Semitism when you came?
No, I didn't. I really didn't. I didn't find that at all. And I did have, in school, I had friends who were, you know, not Jewish. And, you know, we got along very nicely. I never, you know, if they said anything behind my back, I don't know, but never anything like that.
What was Stanford like when you came here? Where did you shop?
Well, you had Pacific Street, which really was the street, you know, the Jewish shopping street. It was very different. Because I remember certain things about it, where Home Goods now is on High Ridge Road. That was an empty lot. And I remember Herbie Walter and Jerry Perloff, you sold Christmas trees there. So you realize what it was. And of course, High Ridge Road was a 2-lane highway, coming and going.
And in the snowstorm, nobody could get up High Ridge Road.
Absolutely. In fact, we lived on Lawn Avenue, which is right near Fairlawn, to give you an idea. And Betty's sister-in-law and brother-in-law, Gussie and Charlie Sachs, lived on Ridge Park Avenue, which right now is not far from the Parkway. I mean, they were south of the Parkway as we are. And we said, oh, well, we have to go visit. We're going to go see Gussie and Charlie. It was like an excursion because that it sort of seemed to end there. And if someone lived further up north, you really didn't even know them. You know, I didn't know anyone who lived farther up.
So where did the concentration of Jews live at that time?
Well, I would say Pacific Street, really.
Did they live there as well?
Yes, there were people who lived there, yeah. And also Lafayette Street was a very big Jewish...
That's also gone.
It's there, but Lafayette Street still is there, but it's, you know, completely different. I think Barbara Sherman lived on that street. I used to meet her to go to high school. I walked over to her house, then we went to high school.
Was C.R. Miller's around then?
Yes, C.R. Miller's.
That was the department store.
The department store. The department store. And Bedford Street was absolutely the Fifth Avenue of Stanford. It was absolutely a magnificent street. You had some of the finest shops there. I mean, the Best & Company was there. And then you had the French shop, which was a wonderful, you know, ladies' apparel shop, and you had the French shop shoe store. I mean, you had a wonderful...
Was Dina's there at that time? Or was that much later?
You know, I don't remember
Dina's was on the...
On the corner?
On the right-hand side, I think.
You know, I can't remember. I have to be honest, I can't remember that.
That was here when I came here.
Yeah, it could have been, but I absolutely don't remember that.
Greenberg's was there. Or was that much later, too?
Well, Greenberg's used to be on Atlantic Street, I think. I don't know if they...
When I came here, it was on Bedford Street.
Oh, was it? That I don't know. I had no boys. See, if you had boys, you shopped at Greenberg's. If you had girls, you shopped at Miller's Lilliputian. So...
was the polka dot shop there then?
Oh, you know what? I think the polka dot shop was up on Summer Street, wasn't it?
Was on Ridgeway?
In the Ridgeway area, I think. I don't think it was downtown. I mean, I have to tell you, I'm trying to think of places that were on Bedford Street. But you know what was on the corner, which was a very fine store, ladies' apparel, was Donna Henry. Where McDonald's now is, we had Donna Henry, and then you had the Annette shop, which was a lingerie shop.
That's right.
And then at the other corner, there was a pharmacy, and it was Lois Levine.
Where the bank is?
No, the other corner. I think it's Forest Street, across the street from the Unitarian Church. Right at the corner there, where the Sabatelli's restaurant is. That was a pharmacy. And it was a very nice town. When I think about it now, it was really a charming town. When I lived here, I was very unhappy. When I moved here, as I say, I was a teenager.
It was a tough time to move here.
It's a very bad time for, you know, what any kid's life. And I was always visiting my friends in New York. And in fact, I was lucky my aunt lived on that same street that we lived on, so, you know, I could go in any weekend, and which I took advantage of.
So your only friend when you came here was Rhea?
Was Rhea. And I met some other people. I also met along the, it was in high school, Ann Lois Gordon Marks. I met her also. at around that time. And then I met some other people along the line. But I would say Rhea was probably, and still is, one of my very dearest friends.
After high school, when you graduated from high school, what did you do?
Well, I went to work because I was a secretary, and I thought working in New York was going to be the most glamorous thing in the world. And I had a few jobs that were very nice. In fact, the last job that I was at, they were great. You know, Ben says, he said, you were anxious to leave already. I said, no, I really like that. But, so I was a secretary, and, all those years. I got married when I graduated when I was...
Where did you and Ben meet?
Blind date. A friend, a mutual friend introduced us.
In Stanford?
No, in New York. Friends of mine. To this day, I am still friendly with the women I grew up with. When I was 8 or 9 years old when we met, we lived on the same street. See, in New York, in the Bronx particularly, you were friends with the people on the street.
Yeah.
You had apartment heads, you had a lot of people. And as I say, to this day, we're still friends. I mean, some of them live in Florida and New Jersey, and we pick up the phone and it's just like we just left off.
Where did you live in the Bronx? Just off the concourse?
No, we did not live on it. No, that was very, very upper class.
Everybody said they always lived off the concourse.
Well,
even if it was...
Even if it was 3 miles away.
That's
no,
right.
I'm honest to say I did not live off the concourse. I lived in what was called the East Bronx, which I found out years later, they started calling the South Bronx. Why, I will never know, because for years it was always the East Bronx, but whatever. That's where I was brought up. We lived in several areas. And then before we moved to Stanford, we lived for a number of years on Hoe Avenue in the Bronx, which was near Southern Boulevard, and Jennings Street, which was the shopping.
You weren't close to Fordham Road?
No. Fordham Road was the concourse.
That was the concourse.
we used to shop there. You could take the
that was the fancy shopping?
Pardon?
Fordham Road was the fancy shopping?
Well, first of all, I don't know. But most of the time I would say, we also went to Manhattan. We would say we're going downtown. We'd go to Klein's or Orbach's. Then also, they had Alexander's.
That was
in
also
the Bronx on Fordham Road.
It was also on 14th Street.
No, not that I know of.
No?
I don't think Alexander's. They had Orbach's, they had Klein's, they had a department store called May's Department Store. They had several smaller ones. But Alexander's was a very big store in the Bronx, right on the corner of the Grand Concourse and Fordham Road. They were not off the concourse.
When you came to Stanford and you got married here,
Yeah.
about how old were you?
At 19.
19.
I was 19 when I got married. We got married in the Bronx at the Ellesmere, and we lived with my parents for several years. And in fact, I had 2 children living with my parents. My sister and my parent, Mickey and Betty, and my parents owned a 2-family house on Lawn Avenue. And we moved in with, when we got married, we moved in with my parents.
Actually, where is Lawn Avenue?
It is off East Main Street, going towards Darien. The Cortlandt Avenue was on the other side of Lawn Avenue.
You almost lived in Darien.
No, definitely not. Several miles. So we lived with my parents for a while, several years I should say, and then our next step, we had a house on Nichols Avenue, and we lived there a number of years. Had some wonderful neighbors who we still exchange holiday cards with, and we say, what's happening in your life, the kids, because they were brought up together. And then we moved to 155 Little Hill Drive, and Lee Fanwick was right around the corner at the time.
What year was that?
I have to do a little math.
It must have been in the 60s.
It had to be in the 60s, Yeah.
Because we were here.
When did you move here?
We came here in 57.
56, had to be in the 60s.
Right.
Yeah.
What are your children doing today?
Well, my daughter Janice, she works in Manhattan. She's a career woman. She works in Manhattan, and she has for a number of years. She lives in New Canaan. She's my oldest daughter. And then Sheila, who is Sheila Crulis. She and her family live in Fairfield. She has 3 children, Jessica, Emily, and Kevin. And then my daughter Cheryl, the baby. She lives in New Canaan, and she's Cheryl Brown. And she has 2 children, Brian and Kelly. And in fact, tonight, which is, as you said, February 3rd, 2010, Emily will be on her way to Prague for having a semester there.
In Prague?
In Prague.
That's interesting.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? And then my other granddaughter, Jessica, just recently graduated college, and she moved to Atlanta already. She has a job. So, you know, the kids fly the coop.
I remember, Elaine, you worked in the Jewish Center, UJA.
Oh, yes. Oh, God.
Who did you work for?
Ida Khan.
Oh,
I worked for Ida Khan. I can't remember how I got the job. Someone must have told me about it. And I went to work for Ida Khan. And when you think of the UJF now, it was the UJA then. I mean, it was small potatoes considering what they have now. But I will tell you, the men who were involved, they worked so diligently.
Who were some of the men who were involved?
Well, I remember Bob Schreiber, of course, was very involved in those days. And, you know, he stands really mostly out of my mind. I know there were other people, but I guess I remember Bob Schreiber's because he was a personal friend. So, and it was so interesting how they would get a list of names of people who to call. And I remember Ida would go down the telephone book, and she would look at the names. I think they're Jewish. I think they're, and you know what? She was pretty good at it. She batted pretty well. So I worked for her for several years, part-time. It was a nice job. I enjoyed working with her. Some people found her a little hard to work with, but I enjoyed it.
The early years when you were active in Hadassah,
Right.
what were some of the projects that you did?
Oh, well, we used to have what we called the Copacabana, which was really like a Broadway show.
I just got some pictures from that, which are in the archives.
Oh, God, it was wonderful. I will tell you also, in the archives there, and I know because I saw them myself, there are scrapbooks that we kept, Hadassah, of invitations. You will see so many things there. When I looked through it one day, I mean, it really brought back so many memories. It was really wonderful. But getting back to the things we did, we had a Copacabana.
How many times did you have?
I think we had at least 3 times. And I mean, it was a home talent, of course, and it was written by members in the group. I mean, and the husbands were really terrific because they would be in the show. I think Bob Redness, he used to do the sound for us. There was Kelly Escott, who I think he played professionally. He came and played the piano. You know, it was really terrific. And with the people in the show, we had a wonderful time. And as I say, we were a very close group. And the men got along. Even if they were not socially friendly, they were Hadassah-ly friendly. And
They were Hadassah husbands.
Exactly, exactly. And then we would have potluck suppers, and we would do the cooking at the Jewish Center.
Elaine, what else was there that was the highlights of what Hadassah did that time?
Well, we used to have dinners. We did the cooking ourselves, and we had a lot of fun. It was really great. We enjoyed doing it. We had tremendous camaraderie, and that was really a big part of the success of our group, because we liked each other, and getting together was our thing. We would make table decorations, you know. It was just a wonderful social life, and also you were doing such wonderful work, you know, because Israel became a state in 49.
Yeah, right. 48.
48, thank you.
Do you have any hobbies besides Hadassah?
Yes. I used to play a lot of mahjong, but I haven't played in years. Ben and I do play bridge. And I used to knit a lot, which I haven't done in a long time.
Getting back to Hadassah, you were president of
Yes,
Hadassah.
I was president of the High Group of Hadassah, and I was also president of the Stanford chapter of Hadassah.
Were you president of Gladys Ailes?
No, I was never president of Gladys Ailes. The Stanford chapter, when I was president of the Stanford chapter, see, there was the original Stanford chapter of Hadassah before the Gladys Ailes. Then the Gladys Ailes group formed, and then the offshoot became the High group, and then the young people went into the Gladys Ailes group. You know, we were the older ones already. And then the groups joined together because the Stanford chapter then became the Roshona. We had the High and the Gladys Ailes. So the Stanford chapter was the umbrella, and the Roshona, High, and Gladys Ailes were part of the Stanford chapter of Hadassah.
And everything was at the Jewish Center.
Oh yes, yes.
When it was on Prospect Street, and then it moved up.
Definitely, our meetings were always there.
Everything was there.
Yeah.
Were your kids active in the Jewish Center?
No, not really. You know, I'll tell you, one of the things that, if you want to take this out of feel free to take it out. At that time, there was a lot of, I don't want to say interdating because the kids were too young for interdating, but they had friends who were not necessarily Jewish. And these kids, the non-Jewish kids, were not welcome to the Jewish Center, which is definitely a form of discrimination. And my kids did have non-Jewish friends that they met in school. So I think that was one of the reasons. I'm not going to say the reason, but if they were having a dance and they couldn't bring their girlfriend along, well, they're not going to go, you know. And so they were not really that active.
Was there a young Judea when you were growing up in Stanford?
There might have been. I was not part of it. If there was a young Judea, I was not involved in it at all. But there were other young boys organizations, as someone just mentioned to me, the AZA I remember, and I'm sure there probably were other, you know,
at the
teenage
Jewish Center
groups.
There was basketball.
Oh yeah, oh it was the building on Prospect Street when I moved here was just lovely. I mean, very impressive. They had a swimming pool, they had a bowling alley downstairs. It was a tremendously active place when I was growing up, very active. I mean, you walked down from Stanford High School and you were right there. So, well, you know, you always stopped there for the afternoon.
How do you think Stanford was when you were growing up as to what it is today?
Oh, it's completely different. When I say that it has grown, when I say it's different, it's because it has grown tremendously. And one way of just comparing it is when you went to the synagogue, the Jewish holidays, and you came out, it took you an hour to get home because you knew everybody and you had to stop to wish them a Happy New Year, what's going on. Years later, when you walked out of the synagogue, it took you 3 minutes to get home because you really knew maybe 4 people. So because it had grown so it was different, but a town has to grow in order to prosper. In fact, the UN wanted to come here before it went to New York, and of course it was poo-pooed, and it, of course, did not come here.
Since you were so active in Hadassah, have you been to Israel?
Yes, Ben and I, we had made one trip to Israel, and we went with friends, Miriam and Saul Decker.
When was that?
And it was just a marvelous, it was just a beautiful trip. It was, when we got off the plane, Ben said, how do you like it? Everybody is really Jewish here. And it just gives you a wonderful feeling, and we had a wonderful time. I mean, we took loads of pictures, and I remember when we came home, hadn't developed immediately, and Saul and Miriam came over right away so we could set our scrapbooks up, because you saw a lot of tells there, so you had to remember where that tell was. So if you didn't do it immediately, you were going to forget.
Right.
But we had a marvelous time. We did go to Hadassah Hospital, and in fact we went to the synagogue there because my friend Lenore Friedman, her husband had passed away at that time, and they had a yahrzeit in Israel she had in his memory. And she said, could you go there and see let me know what it's about. And I went there and spoke with someone there, and they took the book out where his name was listed, and I took a picture of it for Lenore. So it was wonderful. I mean, the hospital, you know, they had the burn center. I mean, thank God nothing drastic was going on then at that time. But it was a wonderful experience, wonderful. Unfortunately, we only went once, but it has terrific memories.
Elaine, show us some of your memoirs of your family.
Okay. So this is a picture of our 50th, our children made us a 50th anniversary party, which was April 2002. And this is a picture of my children and my grandchildren. This is, oh. This is a picture of my mother and father. This is when we lived on Lawn Avenue.
What was your father's name?
Sam. Sam Silver. My mother was Rose. Oh, there is a date here. And this is a picture of myself and my sister taken in 1985, I see. The date in the back.
Elaine and Betty Barron.
Ben and I knew Naomi and Bob Schreiber. First met her, Naomi, in Hadassah, and then we both lived on Nichols Avenue. Both families lived on Nichols Avenue, and we had a wonderful relationship. And in fact, once, it was so funny, Naomi and I were just reminiscing about it because we had lunch maybe a month or so ago. You know, kids used to go around selling things. You know, they'd make a pot holder and such. And we got a telephone call. It's Bob on the phone. He said, you know, I didn't know things were so bad at your house. I said, what do you mean? Well, your kids are here selling pot holders. Well, we were so hysterical. I mean, because this was Bob, we were, you know, and we just had, you know, very, you know, good memories of Bob and Naomi. And in fact, one of my daughters, Janice, had been in a car accident. And she was young at the time, maybe 3rd grade. And of course, she was in the hospital. She coming home from Hebrew school with a bunch of kids in the car. In fact, Julie and Ania Schreiber were in the car. And Janice was in the hospital, and of course, how do you go home and cry? Because you have the little children there. So I would stop off at Naomi's house, have a good cry, and then I would proceed home. So unfortunately, as years went by, we didn't get to see each other that often because, you know, everyone goes in different directions for whatever reason. But Naomi and I have said to this day that even though we don't see each other that much, we have a very strong feeling for each other. I consider them, you know, old good friends. And it was very sad when Bob passed away. He was a nice guy.
Bob was always involved with UJA?
Oh, absolutely. That's how I knew him. I mean, that he was in the UJA. When I worked for the UJA at the Jewish Center, he probably was the baby in the group. I'm sure he was. Was he the prime mover in UJA? You know, it was very different than it is now.
I know.
They would get together, they would have a meeting. Maybe there were 6 or 7 or 8 guys. We would order sandwiches, they'd come on their lunch hour and take care of their business. I mean, they always had a representative from New York who was there, and then they would have allocation meetings just as they had, but it was a complete, I mean, it was on a much smaller scale, but they worked very hard, and I think for the size of the community at the time, I think the UJA probably did very well, because people who were involved with it were really involved in it. They just didn't lend their name. They worked at it.
At that time, what do you think was the amount of money they raised at that time?
You know what, I will not even give a figure because I have no idea. But I will tell you that when they had the 6-Day War, there were people who gave monies that, you know, I wouldn't even mention names, but I knew the names only because I worked there, that you knew that this was a lot of money for them to give. It was, you know, so you knew.
You think people extended themselves more?
Overextended, definitely. People, you know, they had that wonderful feeling. And hopefully, I'm sure they feel that the same way now. But also you have to realize at that time, too, they allocated money to different organizations,
yes.
Which I imagine they still do.
They still do, yes.
Yeah, I would, because that's how they were. But now it's, I mean, this is big business now here. It's completely different. This was run by a handful of guys, and who really, really worked
And
hard.
what was Ida Khan's, she was the office manager?
Yes, she was the office manager. I mean, she really was the big cheese there. I mean, she ran everything, you know, she knew her stuff. And, you know, they had a lot of faith in her. And, she, you know, she was part of it, gave her opinions on certain things. And if I'm not mistaken, she might have even been involved with allocations, with suggestions, because I'm sure that she, you know, checked certain things, because she was, you know, very administrative. Not just the secretary.
Elaine, I want to thank you for allowing us to interview you today.
Oh, thank you so much. It was a
and
delight.
we will give you a DVD for you to enjoy.
Oh, that's great.
With your children, because I'm sure they will enjoy it.
Oh, sure. That sounds lovely.
You now are part of history in Stanford.
This is really very nice. I think this is a wonderful thing that the Jewish Historical Society is doing, because if you don't do it with the people who remember Stanford when, no one's going to remember it.
That's right.
But no, it's great. And I think it's marvelous. You have to get together,
yeah.
Cameraman, the lighting.
Oh, we're
terrific.
We're professional.
Don't laugh. I think it's great.